The first thing that you could easily think when you click on this particular installment of Unsung Heroes is, hang on a second, that's not a Porsche, that's a Volkswagen. And you'd kind of be correct, but also not at the same time. Now, of course, a number of times throughout the years, especially back in the day, you would see different German manufacturers, just like any other country, working with each other. Porsche's worked with Audi on the RS2, they've worked with Volkswagen on a number of cars, they even have their roots based in them, and they've gone back and forth, different companies working with each other on different projects. So the underlying concept of two different German manufacturers working together on a project is not an alien one, except the difference on this occasion is this was actually built not out of some kind of broad intent for production, but it was actually built more out of a necessity on Porsche's part, rather than Volkswagen, and that was because back in the day, in the 80s, they needed a rally support vehicle for their then Group B spec Porsche 959 rally car, which was competing in the Paris-Dakar rally event. They needed something that was quick, spacious, comfortable, reliable, and economical enough to travel the entire event and be just that, a support vehicle. So, as early as 1981, they took a Volkswagen van, or Volkswagen bus, if you will, and they modified it extensively. Now, they built somewhere between 10 and 15 of these all in all. That includes the test prototypes, so it is one of the rarest unicorns out there, but technically, you actually could buy one as a customer. They were only sold through one particular dealership, and they had a price tag of £40,000. Which actually sounds like a pretty good deal for a Porsche minivan, except when you learn what the exchange rate on that is based on inflation, because that means that this would have been, by today's money, a 120 grand minivan, which is insane, Porsche or otherwise. Now, of course, with that kind of price tag, it's got to be more than just a Porsche badge on a Volkswagen. And there aren't exactly a lot of those on the car anyway. It's still got the Volkswagen emblem on the front. However, as you can see, it does have very distinctly Porsche wheels. Now, what they did is exactly what you'd probably think they did. They made it a 911 van, basically, and that's something which a lot of private owners have done, but of course when Porsche themselves do it, that is a whole different level of course, exclusivity, but also they kind of know what they're doing. At least better than some average Joe with a toolkit and a bright idea. Now, this car originally had a 3-litre, of course, flat-six engine with just over 200 horsepower. Now, that alone would make it very quick, of course, especially by 80 standards, and the production run, incidentally, was from 1983 to 1985. But that engine was deemed to be okay, but not as good as it could be. So they then fitted it with a 3.2-litre flat-six from the Carrera at the time with 231 horsepower. They also fitted the car with Porsche electronics, Porsche suspension, brakes, of course those 16-inch Fuchs wheels, and even the steering wheel and gearbox from a 911 as well. Inside and out, it looks like a classy, professionally done job, which really does look like it could have been done as just a straight-up mass production car, rather than a limited run special. A homologation car in its own weird kind of way. And one of the primary differences and changes that they made with that 3.2-litre engine and gearbox configuration compared to the first iteration with a 3-litre is that they wanted it to have a longer 6th gear ratio for better fuel economy and better cruising, not just to be the fastest thing with 9 seats, because that is what it had. It wasn't an empty van. Now, I happen to think the car looks pretty nice from the inside, even though, of course, it does look its age. And in terms of performance, well, of course, it's not going to be as quick by today's standards, because it's essentially a minivan with the power of, say, a mid-2000s hot hatch. So, of course, back then, that was a huge deal. By today's standards, on the other hand, well, it's more likely on the level of a Vauxhall Zafira VXR, for instance, which isn't bad, but it's not quite as cool as you would initially think. However, this was 1983, so big difference by back then's standards compared to now, especially if you compare, for instance, what hot hatches were like back then compared to today. Now, Porsche's official performance figures were actually pretty modest, and that's nothing new for Porsche. They've done that quite a lot. They announced a 0-60 time of about 9.5 seconds, top speed of around 120 miles an hour. That was completely off. The reality is it's more like 8 seconds to 60 with a top speed of about 135 miles an hour, which for something with the aerodynamics of a shoebox is very impressive. Now, this is the kind of car that I would personally expect could be maybe a little bit leery, considering the rear-engine rear-wheel drive layout with Porsche power in something that was never designed to have Porsche power or performance. So it's probably a pretty professional level machine in terms of getting the best out of it, but at the same time, that's exactly what it was intended for. Technically purchasable, but not really. It was more, as I said, Porsche's support vehicle, so of course it was going to be professionals who were using the car. All things said and done though, I personally consider this to be one of the ultimate low-level production, street-legal unicorn cars out there, especially if you take out of the equation the usual stuff that you would expect to be in there, like supercars and hypercars and, Le Mans cars for the street. If you think of more stuff like Group B cars for the street, touring cars for the street like the Sierra RS500, more that kind of era, then I would say that this is definitely one of the ultimate unicorns of that kind of time period. Not quite the same as those, but I would argue it definitely deserves the same kind of respect that many of those cars have. This should not be as good or as fast as it is, but because Porsche themselves did it, it was. And ultimately, the reason why it's an unsung hero is actually, and this is pretty rare for this series, quite deliberate. Porsche deliberately made this an understated car. It is, by definition, a sleeper. So, of course, it's an unsung hero because it did not actually compete in the race. It was in the shadows, being the support vehicle, and a very understated one at that. So of course, it's obvious why this car would be an unsung hero, but at least we can look back on vehicles like this today and appreciate how great they were. Of course the 959 was awesome, but this is pretty damn cool as well. And if you did like this car and this particular episode, and maybe you're new to Unsung Heroes, I would strongly recommend clicking the link down below, jumping over to the Discord chat and going into the voting polls where you can vote if you love this car. And then once we get to episode 100, I'm going to be counting down the community's 10 favourite vehicles that we've discussed so far. But that's it for this installment. Of course, I will see you guys next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.